I created a YouTube channel where I review games, mainly focusing on accessibility options for disabled gamers, and I also write for an independent website called daggersystem.com, and they also focus on accessibility options for disabled gamers. And I forgot to mention that the YouTube channel I go by the name Crippled Critic. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for coming. So we on Monday, everybody watched some of your videos, at least one of the videos. I think most people watched one of the Wolfenstein videos. Yeah, that seemed to generate a lot of interest. So we've got some understanding of what you do in the reviews. And then one of the other things that everybody did was put together some discussion questions. So this big list, which you've seen, is a list of discussion questions that we kind of used last time Michael came and talked about a year and a half ago, and then a ton of additional questions that were devised by you all as well as former students in the class. So what I want us to do is to kind of generate a conversation with Michael about disability in gaming. And this can be broad, disability in gaming culture, or more specific, disability in particular video games, how people with disabilities are represented, considerations of developers, a lot of stuff that y'all talked about and thought about on Monday, and that you heard Michael talk about in the videos that you watched. So feel free to use some of these. I'll just kind of open the floor. I'll start with a question, and then we can just that'll open the floor. Michael will respond. We can just have a nice conversation. I'll keep things moving if it starts to die down, but feel free to ask whatever you like off the sheet or any of your own questions as the conversation progresses. Cool? I'm also recording this right up here. I've got the camera on Michael, so your voices will be heard. If anybody doesn't want to be heard, let me know, and I can pause it, and you can ask a question. I'm going to put it all over everywhere and identify everyone.
Tag me.
And monetize it.
Let me go first. Let me go second, so she called first. I didn't know we were calling shots.
All right, so you watched the review. So I'm curious, just to start us off, Michael, how did you get started reviewing games?
Well, I've played video games my whole life, and mostly because it's fun and it's a good way for me to escape. But about 2 or 3 years ago, I played a game called Assassin's Creed Revelations, and I love Assassin's Creed. Yeah, see? It's a great series, it used to be. And that game, as soon as I got it, I knew that I wouldn't be able to play it because of something as simple as pressing R3. They made it an important feature. So I just, I spent $60 in a game I couldn't even play. So I looked on the internet and I was trying to find a place that would tell you ahead of time what the controls were, and you'd be surprised how little information there is on something like that. So I thought well, instead of just complaining about it, maybe I'll do something about it and try to help other disabled gamers and myself. So yeah, that's what kind of started me on that track.
Awesome. You have some experience with the game he mentioned?
I don't know. It's really good. They're still really good.
Well, I heard Origins is really good. They brought it back.
So
The Revelations have the best online.
So I have a question.
Yeah.
You play console, right?
Yeah, I
So
played.
when you play, do you have to remap everything since you can't press that button, or do you use your own controller, a controller that would allow you to make things easier, or do you use a standard controller?
Well, see, the last generation of consoles, like PS3 and 360, was probably the most frustrating, and that's sort of when I started doing these reviews because of how limited they were. I actually went online and found some people who made a modded controller, and that's what I used for the PS3 for a long time, and that really helped being able to remap all of them. But thankfully, with this new console generation, they've been a lot better about letting you remap them on the console itself. You can go to the accessibility options in PlayStation 4 and I think Xbox One too. So it depends on the game. I think one problem is that developers see that now and they think, okay, I don't have to do anything. They've got it already, available, so I don't have to change anything. And that's not always true. There's things you can help, like button mashing, try to avoid those. And they didn't fix things like subtitles or colorblind options. But yeah, that's how it's been for me lately.
Other questions to follow up on that?
Yeah.
How do you think, because I think I saw you play Grand Theft Auto 5 as Trevor on the wheelchair?
Yeah. Well, I was using footage, but yeah, I think that was actually a modded, automobile or whatever. But I've played other Grand Theft Auto games, and they have actually been relatively good with their accessibility. Auto aim in almost every one of their games, even online. But yeah, they've been pretty good. Were you asking?
So how would you say the computer programs, the computers that are in the video game realm, how do you think, their reactions, what are their common reactions when they see disability as a computer?
You're talking about the AI?
Yeah.
Like NPCs? How do NPCs respond to disabilities?
See, I don't know. Are you saying within the game itself? Well, I haven't seen, in particular, I haven't seen that game, but with Wolfenstein, I don't know if any of you have seen the video I did, but I talked about when the main character was disabled in the beginning, the enemies would react to the way, they're Nazis, so they're going to be like, hey, we don't like you. But it was even just that little bit is interesting to kind of bring it back and show you what it could be like to be disabled, how people react to you. That's interesting. I haven't seen it a lot in other games, but yeah, there's possibility, untapped potential for that.
It's something that you find a lot of games that the non-player characters, the AI in the games don't tend to respond to different types of characters, different types of player characters. So if you choose a male or a female character, or if you choose a black or a white character, NPCs or AI in games generally don't respond differently or much differently to you. So that's a whole, like you said, untapped kind of exploration possibility to see how characters in games would treat one another.
I reviewed a game called Mafia 3, the third game in the series, and it had a really cool thing when it came to characters responding to your race. This is the first game in the series where you were black, and it also takes place in the 1960s. So they even tried to tie it to gameplay where you couldn't go to certain areas that weren't integrated, or they'd tell you to get out, or they call police, or and I thought that was wow, I've never seen any kind of interaction like that. It was a little simple, just characters shouting racial slurs at you or something like that. Not everyone would do that, but still, it's an interesting way to apply race to any game mechanic.
I guess off what she was talking about, the whole NPC thing, video game characters being disabled. We came up with a question yesterday. Where is it? Do you think that game developers will ever take disability seriously enough to make a game about a disabled character and for it to be mainstream and popular like a AAA game?
Yeah, I think it's totally possible. I think Wolfenstein's a great example. They didn't, keep him that way throughout the whole game, but that's a AAA game that costs millions of dollars, and I think it was a risk, but it worked. I think it just depends on the game, if it makes sense, if realistic to the situation. I don't see how it would be a bad idea. In my experience, gamers, for the most part, are actually pretty accepting as long as their characters are powerful. You would want to be them. Doesn't matter, anything. So I'd say, yeah, and probably not that far away.
Are there any examples that you can think of that have that follow like the Wolfenstein level, but that are more about the entire game, that last the entire game?
If anyone's ever heard of the Sly Cooper series, it's like a platforming game, and there's a character who, he's not the main character, but he's like a sidekick that you can play as sometimes. His name is Bentley. He's like a really smart turtle. But he, in one of the games, I guess like similar to Batgirl, he gets injured permanently, so he has to kind of make his own wheelchair. He's like a super genius. He can make up robotic arms, and that I think was like done without anyone really caring about, you know, the difference in the way he plays. But that was it's not like through the whole game, but it's I think it's a good example of it keeping like a balanced approach to disability, not being like completely limited, but also like showing he's capable.
So how important is it for, when designing disability in the games, to walk a line between being realistic, but also, like you said, sort of giving players the ability to be powerful in this way, or to be agentic in this way? There's a line, right?
There is. I think it depends, again, on the game. And I know there's different struggles when making characters. Like, for instance, fighting games have, in the past, used characters in a way that make them look kind of like caricatures. You know, like Street Fighter. I love that series, but like, you know, you'll have a black character that is only black because it's an easy way to visually show the character like this is who they are. And fighting games didn't used to really focus on story. So nowadays we have, you know, games like Mortal Kombat that have like 5-hour story modes that really do flesh out the characters, and I think they're able to kind of, you know, if you had a disabled character who's like blind, he wouldn't just be like, I have a blindfold. You know, he could talk about, or he'd show in some way like why he's blind or how it affected his life. So it depends on the way you have to make a game, the way you have to include them. A game that's focusing on narrative would be very easy to, you know, have a character be more than just sympathetic or someone to escort, you know. I think it depends. I like realism when it makes sense. I wouldn't want to play a game like, you know, Call of Duty, where you're constantly, you know, shooting people and like over the top action, and all of a sudden like a blind person needs you to help like walk across the street like that. Yes, realism, but like, does it make sense for? Would it like stop the game in its tracks? Yeah, it depends, but just on the type of game you're making, I think.
So, like, speaking of being blind, like, one of our assignments where we had to create a video game for someone with a disability, and so we chose to create a game for somebody that was blind, and we focused mainly on like sound or maybe like directions. If the person was blind, they want to play the video game.
Yeah.
The question is, does those type of games exist for blind people who are blind?
They do, and
Whether it's totally blind or.
oh yeah, either way. I was telling David earlier, you know, I've looked into accessibility for a while, and I'm constantly learning. Last year, I reviewed a fighting game, Injustice 2, same people who did Mortal Kombat, and I was just blown away that they added something called audio cues that let blind players know like what moves they were doing. And I looked online, and there are a lot of blind players that play fighting games if these features are available. And yeah, it's totally possible. I also think it's good when making a game to just think, like, could they get to this level if they couldn't see? Is sound important? Is, you know, visually, is there something you need to see in order to get past this level? But it's totally possible.
Were you talking about some game called Perception?
Perception. I have yet to play it, but it is, you play as a blind woman who is going to this haunted house and she's investigating it, but she has a cane that she taps on the ground and she uses echolocation to see your environment. And I think it's a cool way to also use like horror as a, because the greatest horror is when you don't know what you're looking at, you don't know, you hear something but you don't know what it is. I haven't played it, but it sounds like a great way to use her blindness as a gameplay tool. But yeah, I'd want to try it out. Perception.
I don't play video games, but I know when you say like fighting games and Mortal Kombat and things like that, I don't make me think about like it's boy games, like only men are are in it. But so that's what I think about. Like, I don't know, it may be some women in the fighting game.
There are.
Are there?
Right here,
You play?
all the time.
But I'm talking about like, so listen, so how are there gender differences in how disabled characters are represented in the video game?
I was thinking about that. I think that in my experience, there are a lot of disabled characters that have like invisible disabilities, PTSD, or they have like an amputated limb that's replaced with something like mechanical, and they're basically the same. They're just as strong, if not stronger, than the able-bodied person, and those tend to be male. They don't usually tend to be female. When there are disabled characters, because there's not a whole lot of them, I've noticed that the more sympathetic and weaker characters that you may have to just babysit, or just they're written that way to be, I feel sorry for them, they tend to be female. And that you could make an argument that has to do with our societal view on women.
Right.
Could be, definitely. But I have noticed that. Yeah.
Does he have Tomb Raider before Crawl? Would you say the Last of Us would be one? The little girl?
Is she disabled?
Well, people feel bad for her.
Well, then, but she's underestimated. At the beginning, she is, you're a child, so I can't give you any sort of, weapon, or I have to escort you. When really, that's more the character's interpretation of what he's supposed to do. In reality, she's capable, and you learn that. So, I guess you could say, but yeah, I'd say that's a good example, though, of not thinking of her as sympathetic. By thinking of her as weak, you're actually hurting her more.
That's an interesting way to put it. By thinking of her as weak, you're hurting her more.
Yeah, you're just putting her in more danger, and yourself.
Yeah.
But I think that was the point of making her an NPC that can help you.
So in what other ways, because you mentioned that the example of fighting games, or the example where you said that characters who are female and disabled tend to be more objects of pity or less able, and that in some way may reflect larger cultural attitudes toward women or toward femininity. Can you speak to the same kind of thing about disability generally? How disability is represented in games perhaps being a reflection of society's views toward disability?
Well, I can speak from my experience in life as a disabled person, and how disabled characters that I've seen, how they're handled. I don't know if anyone's heard of Silent Hill. I love that series. I'm a big horror fan. But unfortunately, they tend to use wheelchairs and just disability in general as something to be scared of, or just it's associated with sickness, and that's unfortunately how a lot of people see it in real life too. I don't know if I would say, there's an argument to be made that characters that are disabled in games can make others sort of think they're like that in real life, but I don't think it's ever healthy to assume any video game character of any gender, any minority, is the same as someone in real life. But yeah, those are some things I've noticed.
Have you been to play the game?
Oh.
Okay. Go ahead, 'cause I'm asking.
Have you been disabled your whole life?
Say again?
Have you been disabled your whole life?
I have. I was born with a disease called spinal muscular atrophy, and just it weakens my muscles over time. But yeah, and it's kind of over the years made me gravitate to more like technology-based activities.
So one of these questions, there's a game you couldn't play if you hacked into it to accommodate your needs to play it.
Was there a game? Oh yes,
Have you-
definitely.
Which ones have you hacked into?
Well, I'm not good at hacking, but I'm sure everyone in this room has heard of Pokemon Go. You'd be at the living under a rock or something. Well, you know, I wanted to play it. Everyone was, and you know, the game requires you to kind of move and travel and go to different places. Technically, you could kind of play without moving, but you wouldn't really advance. You wouldn't find any Pokemon. So I tried looking online, and I felt like there was no problem finding a third-party program to let me travel because they weren't giving me what I needed to play. I won't mention the app that I use, but it was unfortunate that Niantic kind of cracked down on those things, assuming that people just wanted to cheat with them. So that app doesn't even work anymore. But yeah, I've definitely done that. I feel that if the game developers and the company aren't giving you what you need to play it, then that's a viable option.
It's like a third party isn't like another person, like anybody, a third party or like actual like company?
Well, like a independent like app, like from people who are on the internet and they make their own app that will kind of access the game in the way they want to. That kind of, I mean, third-party program, like something that the company didn't make. They had nothing to do with them.
So how did the Pokemon Go program work? Like, so you mentioned this interesting case where the development company of this game thinks that people are using this app to cheat, and some people may be.
Right.
But people are also using it who, like, for a way to be mobile in the game, right? For a way to move if you don't move like the designers intended in real life. So by taking away the third-party software, the app, you're maybe stopping some cheating, but you're also stopping people who needed to play the game effectively. Can you describe more about how the app actually works? Like, what did it allow you to do?
You could access like the whole maps of the whole world, and just type in an address, and it would take you straight to that, like as if you traveled instantly or teleported. And you know, it was janky. You know, it didn't work perfectly because it wasn't the company that made it. It was, you know, fans. But you know, it just let you use your same profile as you did when you're on your mobile device, and just let you travel different places, or it appear that you were traveling.
Okay.
Have you ever played the game Evil Within?
I tried. The game's hard.
Yeah. Do you remember the old lady that would be in every room in the wheelchair?
I didn't get that far.
Oh, I'm sorry.
What was she like?
It actually, well, do you plan on finishing it?
I might like watch a Let's Play.
Are you about to spoil it?
Yes,
said what was
she
it like?
is.
Don't spoil it.
Are you a gamer, Kelly?
Yes.
Oh. But she's an interesting character?
Yeah.
What
She
can,
freaks
like,
you
what can
out.
you say?
She freaks you out, that's all I'm gonna say. She freaks you out. I mean, you know, it's just, I don't wanna spoil it. Damn it, Kelly, cover your ears.
I played it.
Cover your ears. I don't know what to tell you. Do you care if I spoil it?
Do you care if it gets spoiled? Is anybody playing?
It's fun.
Alright,
Just go for it.
The little girl ends up being that old lady, like, like in the wheelchair, and she ends up in like every room, but the old lady represents like the young girl. So I'm just wondering, you know,
That sounds a
would
lot
that
like.
be a crippling thing in her personality to like, you know, the little girl that the movie is based around? I mean, not the movie, the game.
See, that sounds a lot like Resident Evil 7.
Oh, that's crazy.
Yeah, I
That
love
is, that is Resident Evil 7.
I was gonna say, that
Evil
sounds.
Within's the one with the detective, Castellanos in the mental hospital at, something falls.
I
Yeah,
didn't remember a woman in a wheelchair.
in 7?
That is Resident Evil 7.
Resident Evil 7.
Yeah.
But.
I was like, wait a minute.
Oh yeah, Biohazard.
Yes.
Yes.
I'm sorry, it's just they're both creepy.
They're both, yeah, they are.
And they're both like combined in a place.
So
Uh-huh.
I never played, I never finished it.
Well, that's a cool example because that character, you know, you assume she is just this meek old lady who isn't going to hurt you and may actually be someone you need to help, when in reality she's the one who orchestrated everything.
Right.
You know, that's definitely kind of flipping your assumption. So that's an interesting example.
Alright, so talking more about your reviews that you do and the site that you work for, Dagger.
Yeah.
Dagger.
Dagger system, yeah.
Dagger system. What kinds of things do you keep in mind as you review games?
Well, I try to focus on 3 different kinds of disabilities. Fine motor skill impairments, people who, you know, might need help with their mobility, people with visual impairments, and people with hearing impairments. So those are the main 3. With fine motor skill impairments, you know, look for options that help you customize the controls, maybe difficulty levels, auto aim if it's a shooting game. With visual impairments, you want a brightness slider, or colorblind options, an ability to maybe change the color of text for those who have trouble distinguishing certain colors. For hearing impairments, subtitles definitely. There are ways you can fine tune that. You can have them encompass ambient noise, so it's not just what they're saying, but also like noises that let them know something off screen is happening. But those are the main things to focus on. Yeah.
Oh,
I apologize, but I came in a little bit late, and I apologize about that. But I'm just curious, like, a little bit about your background and where you're from originally.
Where I'm from?
Yeah.
I was born in Virginia. My dad moved around a lot. Well, we moved around a lot because he was in the Air Force.
Okay.
But I came here when I was 5, and yeah, I stuck around. Started playing games at age 4. Mortal Kombat. Yes, our parents didn't care about violence.
At 4, you playing Mortal Kombat?
Huh? Yes, I swear, my mom played with me. But yeah.
So she wins.
Yeah, I mean, back then it was mainly just pressing buttons randomly, but I think it's slightly off topic, but, you know, I asked my other friends, like, oh, what games did you play when you were young? I was like, I played Mortal Kombat. They're like, whoa, I wasn't allowed to play games like that, and I think it's important to remember, like, if you are active with your kids and you know what they're playing, you know, and you're able to tell them, like, what's real and what isn't, I think it's okay. But when you are kind of, parents tend to use games as like a babysitter, and that's not good. But yeah.
Alright, so like, question, I asked you about the whole like disability, accessibility and stuff being more like involved in part of games, but like, if you like sit there and think about what it would cost or like the resources to actually like make that happen, do you see that like viable? You know, because the whole AAA thing like is killing companies too in of itself.
Yeah.
So like, do you see that being like a thing that can actually happen, or more of like something to hope for?
Oh, it can happen. It's, you know, you have to deal with a lot of things, especially with bigger companies, time constraints, budgets, but in my experience and speaking with like indie developers, I've heard that it's a lot easier to implement these things early on in development. I've heard horror stories about like companies getting told they need to add like a subtitle resizer last minute, and because they didn't plan for it, there are all algorithms that are working well, one's for the visual, and if you didn't plan for it, it can mess things up. So planning ahead, they're not as expensive as people would say. They really aren't. When you're talking about the basics like customizable controls, subtitles, colorblind options, the main three, because those are generally going to help a lot more people. So it's definitely possible. It's again, it depends. A lot of indie developers are more likely to add things because they want more people to play their games, and they have fewer people involved, and it's usually a smaller project. But no, it's definitely viable. It just needs to be done early on in development.
So we're talking about game developers, but do you think that software developers should be held accountable too? Because we talked about that lower level, but the software developers are the ones who create what the gaming developers create. So they're in a way above the gaming developers. Would it be better for them, or I guess for us, to look at them for more advocacy instead of the gaming developers? Like Blizzard, people who make the graphics card, things like that.
I'm not sure. Well, you mean above, not even people working on the game, but working on the parts?
Like physics software, they have to buy those things before they can make their game.
Yeah, I think the software is available. It's not really about, well, I could add, subtitles, but I have this crappy, computer. That's usually not the problem. And if that were a problem, yeah, it would probably be higher up, like producers not wanting to pay for your technology. But yeah, I'm not sure software isn't usually the issue. It might be an excuse that they use, but it's usually not the main problem.
There's an old argument in, I think it was one of the Assassin's Creed games, where Ubisoft came under criticism for not having any or many female NPCs. Like the regular NPCs that walk around the world, the regular enemies were almost all male. And a lot of players started pointing this out and said, hey, why aren't you adding more female NPCs or characters? And they said, well, they're expensive to animate because you have to animate breasts and hips and you change the body type. And it just takes more time, and that's why. That was the excuse they gave, right? So they're using this notion of it costs extra money, it costs extra time, or the software is difficult to animate this as an excuse for why it didn't happen.
Spits out games every year using old assets. Why not just use a female character from another game? Yeah, it's excuses.
Are you talking, what Assassin's Creed are they complaining about? Because I've
One of the
seen
old
women.
ones. One of the old ones.
Yeah, it was
The
like
first one?
An older one, I don't remember which one.
Because I've seen, I just played all of them,
Yeah.
and I've seen women, because I got told not to kill them.
Yeah. There are female characters, but
It was the one with you could get to play as 4 different guys. I forgot.
Syndicate?
Yeah.
No, not
Syndicate.
No.
It's
The one before that.
Unity?
Yeah.
Okay, I think I remember playing as a female one, or was that Syndicate where you
No, that's Syndicate.
switched? Okay.
That's Syndicate.
I hated them both. Okay.
Nah.
I love the Ezio edition.
so what are some other, so Charlie's talking about software and hardware, what are some other roles in the game industry where progress can be made to be more inclusive?
I've heard, the idea thrown around that, why not kind of put some sort of requirement to put representation more representation of all types. And that's hard because at the end of the day, video games are entertainment, and it might not be, there might not be a way to sort of push that legally. But there's, other countries have tried it. I know England, BBC, they have some things put in place to kind of say you need more representation. Maybe that'll happen here. I think ideally, you would want some kind of just talking with disabled people, maybe game playtesters. That would be. I think it's always best to have more diverse playtesters to give you more perspectives. And it doesn't have to just be like, oh, fly out these people because that's not always viable for certain companies. Just calling, consulting. That's where I would kind of focus.
Somebody not.
Just to kind of like deviate a little bit from the video game talk. It's very cool, by the way. But just out of curiosity, like, what's your this is a more personal question. Like, what's your your favorite genre of music? Like
Music?
hip hop or classical or?
Oh man, I love all
Who's your
types.
favorite artist?
I love all types of music. I think rock is my favorite. I love heavier stuff. I love the classic, like Pink Floyd. I love hip hop too. I just got into more of the modern hip hop. Like I love Run the Jewels. I think they're cool. I'm also a little pretentious. I like a lot of unheard of bands and groups, but yeah, I like a little bit of everything.
That's what's up. Just curious.
What's that in your hand?
This, it's a controller, a PlayStation 3 controller that the company that makes my wheelchair, they programmed it to work with this.
That's what I thought.
Yeah, my old chair, I had a different device, and they stopped manufacturing them, and they asked me do you play PlayStation? I was like, boy, do I.
That's what I thought it was. I just wanted to be sure because I'm like, is he using that to operate? Or you just gonna show us something?
It's a conversation starter for sure. I'll see kids walk around being like, Mama, he has a PlayStation.
But that fits you though. You like play. There you go.
It's real cool.
Oh, yeah, thanks.
We'll see if the county can get some for the kids. Yeah, like too much. I work with special education. So.
Okay, yeah, I'm sure it's expensive.
Is it a common thing for people to incorporate gaming devices or gaming elements?
I don't think so, but I mean, it makes sense if you play them and your mobility is already kind of limited. But if you're used to playing with this, yeah, it could work.
What was the rationale? So I remember your other one was the mouse, right?
Yeah, it was like a laptop mouse looking.
Was that the rationale for that as well? It's people use mice, people use trackpads, to play games, to use a computer.
I don't know. I'm kind of a rare case. I'd say severely disabled, and most people have the joystick on the side. So with me, they definitely played around with different things that would work for me specifically. But this has kind of worked out with the controller.
So, have you heard of Overwatch?
Oh yeah, my friend's obsessed with that game.
It's a lot of fun, but you know how their esports scene is blowing up, right?
Yeah.
Do you think regular sports where they have, the Paralympics or the Special Olympics where disabled athletes are able to compete? Do you think that would be the same thing for esports, or do you not?
I'm not sure it's needed. The great thing about games and being part of the gaming culture while being disabled is that your disability isn't really that important. For the most part, a lot of us tend to get, viewed as disabled first and pitied. While with games, you can, win, you can play, and your merit isn't based on do they feel sorry for me? They don't know. I would say that like any kind of support and accommodations would be, it's definitely something you can include in those kind of like tournaments and sports. But I've seen online, there's plenty of gamers who, have no arms and play with their feet, and they whoop anybody's ass, So yeah, I don't see it as something needed. Maybe just accommodations for what's already there.
Good question.
Yeah. Hey.
Are there any upcoming games you're excited about?
Oh, plenty. I was talking to David about Naughty Dog. They did Uncharted. I love that series, and
The Last of Us 2.
oh god, I'm so excited for that.
Did you get God of War yet?
I want to, because it's funny. Both games. Like I said, I write for this website, and they do consulting. The main guy who runs it, he consults with certain developers and kind of help them add accessibility options. And he worked with them on God of War and the upcoming Last of Us. So I'm excited to play it, but also to see like what they do, because they've been really good, especially Naughty Dog, with implementing all sorts of accessibility options. And you can tell they're going to keep doing that with each game they make. But I want to see how God of War is done, because I like God of War, but the originals were really hard to play. Way too many quick time events.
Right.
Yeah, precision and timing is not easy for fine motor skill impairment. But yeah, I'm excited for what they make.
You said they also consulted on Fortnite. You were talking about their class.
Yeah.
But you've seen or you've heard what they did, what your website editor did.
Yeah. See, I don't play it, but I know, I just saw that they updated it with an accessibility tab within the options, and it's all about colorblind options, I think, and it's pretty advanced. You can, they give you different pictures to click on to show you, like, depending on what type of colorblind impairment you have, what colors you can see. And don't quote me on this, but I would assume that the guy from my website helped make that happen.
What's the worst game you've ever reviewed in terms of accessibility options?
Well, I reviewed a lot, and I tend to, start to assume, like, well, this game will probably be inaccessible because of the scope, because of the, it's AAA, and they might not, be thinking on those terms. So a game like Horizon, it's fun, but like, man, it's really hard to play because there's like broken auto aim, it doesn't even work. But then there's games that I would assume would be accessible just because they're like point and click. And then, you start wondering, like, what were they thinking? They completely messed up the mouse control. They made, item menus really hard to navigate. Like this game called Memoranda, which don't play it. It's not fun anyway, but it's also hard to play, and it's supposed to be pretty easy. But yeah, there's been a few. Things are getting a lot better though, so I don't tend to rail on games anymore, but every now and then you'll see a few that just like, what were they thinking?
So that's the other question.
What?
So they need to take a disabilities class. On how
Yeah,
to,
somebody asked that last
yeah,
time.
how to make it work. Yeah.
Yeah, should all game developers take a sociology
Right.
disability class?
I mean, it wouldn't hurt.
Yeah.
I've noticed that gaming has become so international that you can get on TV and you see these contests where they can earn $150,000. Now, being that these gamers are getting up to that stake, is this something that, say, someone like yourself or any other disabled gamer, are they included in this type of contest, or just because I noticed that they got these large ads? Nothing small. You know, when they get through, they put this big pad into the briefcase and they walk off. You
Yeah.
know? But if a disabled gamer wants to get into something like that, would they be able to, or are they excluded simply because of the mechanics of the game and how it's played in the contest?
You know, I would have loved to like try it out and tell you whether it is or not. If it isn't, it should be.
Right.
There's been a few like Street Fighter tournaments like in Atlanta that I was like, oh, I should try and see like whether they would even want me to bring my own controller. Like, is that something that they'll allow? Do they have rules about whether you can change the controls if you want to? Is that considered like?
Well, see, that's what I was thinking, because I'm like, here it is. Here's a scenario I'm thinking. Okay, you have a disabled gamer coming in, creates his own way of playing it to be able to play better, but then they look at you as, well, he's getting upper hand.
Yeah.
You see what I'm saying? I think that's like a twist. That's why I was going to ask the question.
Yeah, I'd have to ask around and maybe see like if people who've actually gone to them and tell me their experience. But off of what you said, as far as like an unfair advantage, that's the one kind of complaint I hear from people who like don't want accessibility options because it will change their experience within the game. And I think that it is an argument to be made depending on the type of game, especially games that are multiplayer when you're actually interacting with other people. But I found two ways to get over those hurdles. One is, when accessibility options are turned on, they tell you that something's taken away, like you can't take trophies or you can't get achievements, because it lets the able-bodied player know, like, okay, this is something I don't want, and it's going to change the experience. For me, that kind of option is fine, but it also kind of unintentionally penalizes a disabled person. But recently, I've played two other games that tried something even more simple. One was Darkest Dungeon. I don't know if anyone's heard of it, but it's like a dungeon crawler with RPG elements. It's really hard, and a lot of like random variables kind of affect your battles. But you can turn all of that off in the options menu if you want. But when you turn it off, it just has like a disclaimer that says, hey, this game was meant to be played like this, but if you have trouble or you want to turn it off, you can. Another example is this side-scrolling platformer called Celeste. It's pretty new. You've heard of it? Yeah, it's they have ways you can turn on invincibility and basically just hand-hold you to the game, but they let you know, like, hey, when you turn this on, know that the game was meant to be played a certain way. And I think that's probably the best way to handle it. That way there's transparency, you're not getting any kind of unfair advantage. A more popular game, I think Grand Theft Auto 5, we were talking about that. I've heard that online you can still keep auto aim, but everyone knows like when it's available in the match. So there's no, like, oh, hey, that person has unfair. Everyone knows and everyone can use it. But yeah, that's what I've seen.
When you do that, when you change like the way the game's supposed to be played, does it hinder you from getting like achievements?
Yeah, it does. And I think at the end of the day, disabled people just want to play the game. We're not looking for any kind of advantage, but so I don't mind, but I do think there are other ways you could do it.
It sort of goes to the conversation we were having the other day. You asked the question of like having like cybernetic.
Does that make you like disabled?
Yeah.
Do you think that let's say, I don't know, God forbid, I get my foot blown off and I get like a cybernetic prosthesis and I run faster than anybody else. I can do all these things that no one else can do. Am I still disabled?
Well, it's like, with those kind of scenarios, do you consider yourself disabled? I would, because there are still certain limitations. You may be perceived differently because of it. the thing about games though is that usually they're not really focusing on the differences. They're saying like, look at how great like and how even better this person is because of it. And that's good too. But yeah, and most of them don't consider themselves disabled. But that's a good good discussion about whether they are or not, or whether it matters whether they consider themselves something. But say like someone can compare character Snake from Metal Gear Solid to the character Adam Jensen from Deus Ex. At least in Deus Ex, a large focus of the game is about like how like we're changing our bodies to the point where what are we? Are we machine? Are we human? How does this affect us like mentally, socially? And that's that ties right into disability. So I think it depends, but yeah.
Other questions? I've got a couple more, but I'll feel free to ask.
Yeah.
PUBG or Fortnite?
What?
PUBG or Fortnite?
I'm only gonna say Fortnite because like it's more accessible.
Since you brought that up, there is a disabled gamer called Rocky No Hand.
Ah.
Yeah, and his rig helped him play PUBG. And what do you think about that?
His rig?
Yeah, because Rocky's disabled from the neck down. And the way he controls, he has the system that they created where he breathes into it, he controls, he moves, he shoots, and he reloads with everything. Yes.
That's awesome.
So yeah, if you do, just search it up, search up PUBG Rocky No Hand, and it's amazing the way he will play because he has this device next to his mouth and he just blows air into it, and the way it works is just amazing. It's like he blows it into it, he moves, he shoots, he does everything. Like, and if you could see him play squad with like 3 other mates, and he was just like, yeah, Rocky, go get him. Like, it's crazy, it's intense.
See, and I bet they don't even know, the ones who don't know him, that
If they do know him, they probably do, but yeah, that's crazy. It's just like someone paralyzed from the neck down is controlling a character that is, you're playing a game that your awareness has to be on 24/7.
Not even that good. But too.
yeah.
He's actually pretty cool. He's a streamer too. He streams on Twitch regularly.
Like I said, I'm
Rocky
constant.
No Hand?
Yeah, Rocky No Hand.
I'm gonna have to look him up, but I'm constantly learning. I saw a video talking about developing mobile games and what to like do to help like apply like a switch control. I don't know if you know what that is. I didn't until I watched it, but there are people who can't move anything but their fingers, and there's like a button that you can press to like help you. Just one button that helps you go through like menus on a computer or menus on a mobile app. And there was a guy who I think worked for BBC. He edited videos, and all he could do was press one button. So there's technology has got there. It's possible.
Other questions?
What are your questions?
Yeah. I got 2 more. And these are just about your reviews. A, I'll ask them both. How people responded to your reviews, and B, what have you learned from doing all this, from your experiences?
Mostly positive. I'm always really happy when another disabled gamer responds and says like, "Thank you. If it wasn't for this review, I wouldn't have got this game, or I wouldn't have played this console." And that's like. Yes, that's what I wanted. That's why I do these. Even in some other things, when I get contacted from a developer, and they ask me, like, well, okay, how would you want? What would be good to add to make this more accessible? Or I played this game recently where I asked them if they could change something, and they did. Within like a week, they added a patch to. Add more customizable controls. So, yeah, that's always great. And indie developers are definitely more, they're better with communication because I think they have more time and less work. But that's some good things that have come from it.
And what have you learned from all of your work? If you can summarize.
I'm learning so much. Think of all sorts of think about the way you play a game differently. I've definitely done that. You know, now I'm like, okay, that was fun, but that color, like, is that important? Will, you know, a colorblind person need, you know, help playing this? You know, because I'm not colorblind, so you have to kind of think, like, what if? So I've been doing that more. I've been kind of learning how to think outside the box, and I'm still learning.
Awesome.
Yeah.
That's all the questions I have. If you have any questions for anyone else, if anybody else wants questions afterward, feel free to stick around. We'll hang out, and you can chat with Michael. Michael will talk to you. So thank you so much for coming. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you.
Last words for the camera.
Thanks for having me.
Okay.